I should have known something was wrong when Michelle started caring about football. For 12 years of marriage, my wife had treated Jake's youth sports like a necessary evil, something to be endured, not celebrated. She'd drop him off at practice with a distracted kiss and return exactly when pickup time ended, scrolling through her phone while other parents cheered from the sidelines. Football was different, though. Suddenly, she was invested. "I think I should get more involved with the team," she announced one Thursday evening, standing in our kitchen wearing a jersey she'd somehow acquired. Jake's number, of course, but it fit her curves in a way that seemed intentional. "Since when?" I asked, not looking up from my laptop where I was reviewing quarterly reports for the insurance firm. "Since I realized I've been a terrible football mom." She smoothed the jersey over her hips. "Jake needs to see me supporting him." The mortgage payment was due Tuesday. The lawn needed cutting. The hallway photos, our family frozen in annual holiday poses, watched me from their frames as I nodded absently. Everything looked perfect from the outside. Suburban success, responsible husband, devoted father, the kind of life insurance companies use in their brochures. But Michelle's sudden enthusiasm felt wrong. She started staying late after games, volunteering for team events she'd previously avoided. Parent council meetings ran longer than they used to. She bought new clothes, not the practical mom uniforms she'd worn for years, but fitted jeans and tops that showed her figure. "The team needs more parent involvement," she explained when I questioned her schedule. "Coach Ramirez says engaged parents make better players." Coach Ramirez. She mentioned him frequently now, always with a slight smile that didn't reach her eyes when she looked at me. Roberto Ramirez, the district's golden boy coach who'd taken 3 teams to state championships. The man other fathers respected and other mothers found charming. I wanted to believe her explanations. Marriage requires trust, and questioning that trust felt like admitting failure. So I rationalized the changes: midlife crisis, empty nest syndrome preparing to strike, newfound maternal guilt. All reasonable explanations for a woman approaching 40 who'd spent years focused on her teaching career. The inconsistencies were small at first. Phone calls that ended abruptly when I entered the room, showers immediately after returning from school events, a sudden interest in fitness that didn't include family gym membership discussions. I told myself these were positive changes, signs of a wife reclaiming her independence. But intuition isn't easily silenced. It whispered during quiet moments, questioned during sleepless nights, and grew louder with each passing week. The woman who'd shared my bed for over a decade was becoming a stranger, and I was helping her maintain the illusion by refusing to acknowledge what my gut already knew. The breaking point came on a Tuesday. Michelle had attended what she called a parent council meeting to discuss fundraising for new equipment. Important stuff, she said, the kind of meeting that required her full attention and might run late. She returned at 11:30 p.m. with grass stains on her white jeans and the smell of men's cologne that wasn't mine lingering in her hair. When I mentioned the stains, she laughed. A sound that didn't match her eyes. "Someone spilled wine at the restaurant afterward," she said, already heading toward the bathroom. We stayed to finish planning the car wash. I stood in our living room, surrounded by the evidence of our shared life, and felt something fundamental shift inside me. The photos on the wall, the mortgage we'd struggled to secure, the careful construction of our suburban dream. None of it protected us from the rot that was spreading through our marriage. That night, listening to Michelle shower away evidence I couldn't name, I made a decision that would change everything. I stopped trying to believe her lies and started paying attention to the truth. The violation of trust works both ways, I discovered. If Michelle could lie to me for months, I could certainly sync our iCloud accounts without asking permission. The technical process was surprisingly simple. We'd shared an Apple ID for years, one of those married couple conveniences that saved money on apps and music. I'd never used it for surveillance, but accessing her deleted texts, call logs, and photo streams took less than 10 minutes on my home computer. Sitting in my office at 6 a.m., coffee growing cold beside my keyboard, I felt like a criminal. The rational part of my brain argued that married couples share everything, that transparency was healthy, that I was protecting our family. The moral part whispered that I'd crossed a line I couldn't uncross. But the evidence was overwhelming. 3 months of deleted text conversations with Coach R. Hundreds of messages that painted a picture of escalating intimacy. Photos taken at times when Michelle claimed to be in faculty meetings or parent conferences. Location data that showed her iPhone in hotel parking lots on nights she'd supposedly been at school events. I approached the investigation like an insurance case, methodical and thorough. Spreadsheets tracking her movements, screenshots organized by date and time, a timeline that revealed the careful construction of her double life. The messages were the worst part. Not just the sexual content, though that was devastating enough, but the casual way she discussed me and Jake. He's so predictable, she'd written about me. Always buried in his work, never notices anything. About Jake, the game gives us perfect cover. He thinks I'm being a good mom. I found her secret Instagram account, carefully curated to show her real life. Photos from restaurants I'd never been to, concerts I didn't know she'd attended, events that occurred during her supposed work obligations. The account had 47 followers, all people from the football community, all living in the world she'd created without me. The hotel room selfies were dated 3 weeks ago, the night she'd claimed to be at a parent council retreat. Michelle in a red dress I'd never seen, holding a champagne glass in what was clearly a hotel room. The next photo showed her reflection in the bathroom mirror, taking a picture of Coach Ramirez sleeping in the bed behind her. I stared at that image for 20 minutes, my coffee growing cold, my hands shaking slightly as I scrolled through the evidence of my wife's betrayal. The woman who'd shared my bed for 12 years, who'd borne my child, who'd built this life with me, she was documenting her affair like a teenager with her first boyfriend. The financial records were equally damning. Credit card charges at restaurants during her supposed work meetings, hotel bookings that coincided with school events she'd claimed to attend, purchases at Victoria's Secret, a store she'd never shopped at during our marriage. By 8 a.m., I had assembled a comprehensive case that would have impressed any insurance investigator. Michelle had been having an affair with Coach Ramirez for at least 4 months, possibly longer. She'd used our joint finances to fund her deception. She'd involved our son by using his football schedule as cover for her meetings. The evidence was both vindicating and devastating. I'd been right to suspect, but being right meant my marriage was over. I'd uncovered the truth, but the truth was that the woman I'd loved for 15 years had been systematically betraying me and our family. I printed everything, screenshots, call logs, financial records, GPS data. The stack of papers grew to over 200 pages. A comprehensive dossier of infidelity that would have made any private investigator proud. Sitting in my office, surrounded by evidence of my wife's betrayal, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Clarity. The confusion, the self-doubt, the desperate rationalization. All of it disappeared, replaced by cold, focused determination. Michelle thought she was smarter than me, more sophisticated, more deserving of excitement and passion. She'd constructed an elaborate lie and assumed I'd never discover it. She'd underestimated the man she'd married, the father of her child, the husband she'd decided to betray. That was her first mistake. It wouldn't be her last. Carmen Rodriguez had the kind of eyes that missed nothing, sharp, calculating, and completely without judgment. She'd been recommended by Margaret Chen, a family law attorney who specialized in high-conflict divorces. Former police detective, Carmen had told me over the phone, 20 years on the force, the last 8 in domestic investigations. We met at a diner on the outskirts of town, away from the suburban restaurants where Michelle and I might be recognized. I slid a manila folder across the Formica table, watching Carmen's expression as she reviewed my amateur investigation. "You did good work," she said after 15 minutes of silent reading. "But you're thinking like a husband, not like a prosecutor. What's the difference? Prosecutors need admissible evidence. Husbands need closure." She closed the folder and leaned back. "Which one are you?" I considered the question. 3 weeks ago, I would have said, closure. Now, having spent sleepless nights organizing evidence and cross-referencing timelines, I wanted something more comprehensive. "Both," I said. Carmen smiled, the first real emotion I'd seen from her. "Good. Then we can work together." She explained the legal requirements for surveillance, the difference between suspicion and proof, and the reality of building a case that would stand up in court. My iCloud access was legally questionable, but since I owned the family plan, most of the evidence would be admissible. The photos and messages, however, needed corroboration. "We need to catch them in the act," Carmen said. "Not just digital footprints, but physical evidence, photos, witnesses, documentation that can't be disputed." I authorized Carmen's full surveillance package: GPS tracking on Michelle's car, legally installed on a vehicle I co-owned, photographic surveillance during her suspected meetings, and background investigation into Coach Ramirez's history. The investigation consumed me. I found myself checking Carmen's reports multiple times daily, studying surveillance photos with the intensity I'd once reserved for insurance claims. Michelle's affair had given me a purpose I'd been missing: the thrill of the hunt, the satisfaction of uncovering truth. My day job became a cover for my real work. I scheduled client meetings around Michelle's suspicious activities, used my lunch breaks to review Carmen's findings, and spent evenings organizing evidence files with the precision of a prosecutor. The background check on Coach Ramirez revealed a pattern I hadn't expected. 3 different schools over 8 years, each departure coinciding with rumors of inappropriate relationships with parents. Nothing proven, nothing prosecuted, but a clear pattern of behavior that made Michelle's affair part of a larger story. "He's done this before," Carmen reported during our weekly meeting. "Athletic directors protect winning coaches. They transfer problems instead of solving them." The surveillance photos arrived 2 weeks later. Michelle entering the Marriott on Highway 6 at 3:47 p.m. on a Tuesday. Coach Ramirez arriving 16 minutes later. Their intimate embrace in the parking lot. The timestamp showed Michelle was supposed to be in a parent-teacher conference at that exact moment. I studied the photos with clinical detachment, no longer the betrayed husband, but the architect of justice. The images were clear, undeniable, and completely devastating to any defense Michelle might offer. But proving the affair wasn't enough anymore. I'd evolved beyond the simple need for evidence. I wanted comprehensive consequences. Not just divorce, but justice for everyone who'd been betrayed by Michelle's choices and enabled by the system that protected Coach Ramirez. Carmen understood without explanation. "You want to burn it all down," she said. "I want them to face the consequences of their choices." She nodded. "Then we need to dig deeper. Affairs are just the beginning. People who lie about one thing usually lie about others." I authorized expanded surveillance, financial investigation, and background checks on the entire network of people who'd enabled Michelle's deception. The cost was significant, but I viewed it as an investment in justice. 3 weeks later, Carmen delivered a report that exceeded my expectations. Coach Ramirez wasn't just a serial cheater. He was under formal investigation by the school board for inappropriate conduct with another family. Michelle wasn't just having an affair, she was actively helping to cover up his pattern of behavior. The revelation transformed my understanding of the situation. Michelle hadn't just betrayed me, she'd compromised our son's safety and enabled a predator. The anger I'd been controlling for months crystallized into something harder and more focused. I held their futures in my hands now, and I intended to use that power wisely. Ramirez wasn't just my wife's lover, he was a predator with a system. Carmen's expanded investigation revealed a pattern spanning 3 school districts and 8 years. Inappropriate relationships with team parents. Complaints filed and quietly resolved. Transfers orchestrated to avoid prosecution. The man had turned youth athletics into his personal hunting ground. I spent my lunch breaks infiltrating parents' social media groups, carefully gathering intelligence about other families' experiences. The stories were eerily similar. Sudden interest in team activities from previously uninvolved mothers, late-night strategy sessions, and team events that seemed designed to create intimate opportunities. "Lisa Martinez thinks something's not right about Coach R," one parent had posted in a private Facebook group 6 months ago. "Her mom instincts are going crazy." The post had generated 17 comments, mostly defensive of the coach's character and winning record. But buried in the thread was a pattern of subtle warnings from other mothers, coded language about keeping an eye on things and trusting your instincts. Michelle had been active in shutting down these discussions. I found her comments defending Ramirez's character, minimizing other parents' concerns, and actively discrediting mothers who voiced suspicions. She'd been protecting him, using her credibility as a teacher to silence other parents' warnings. The school district had files on Ramirez. Carmen's contacts in the administrative office confirmed it. 3 formal complaints over 5 years, all resolved through counseling and professional development. The winning seasons made him untouchable, and the complaints were treated as jealous gossip rather than legitimate concerns. I learned that Jake had witnessed some of Ramirez's inappropriate behavior. During a carefully casual conversation about football, my son mentioned seeing the coach talking privately with certain moms after games, including his own mother. The revelation made me physically ill. Michelle's affair had contaminated our son's environment. Coach R has special meetings with some parents, Jake said while we threw football in the backyard. Mom says it's about strategy, but they seem more like dates. My 12-year-old son had better instincts than I'd given him credit for. He'd noticed the inappropriate nature of his mother's relationship with his coach, but he'd been told it was normal, acceptable, part of being a team family. The financial investigation revealed another layer of Michelle's complicity. She'd used our joint credit card to pay for team parties at restaurants where Ramirez entertained select parents. She'd funded hotel rooms for team planning retreats that only certain families attended. Our money had subsidized the network that enabled her affair. But the most damaging discovery was Michelle's professional vulnerability. As a public school teacher, she'd signed a morality clause in her employment contract, a provision that allowed termination for conduct that reflected poorly on the school district. Having an affair with a coach, while using school resources to facilitate the relationship, was a clear violation. Carmen's contact in the district office confirmed that Ramirez was already under formal investigation for misconduct with the Peterson family. Their complaint had triggered a board review that was still pending, held up by his attorney's stalling tactics and the district's reluctance to lose their star coach. "Your evidence could be the final piece," Carmen reported. "They need a pattern to make termination stick. Right now, they have 1 complaint. You can give them a second victim and proof of ongoing misconduct." The revelation transformed my understanding of the situation. I wasn't just seeking revenge against my wife's affair. I was sitting on evidence that could protect other families from a predator. The moral implications were clear. Staying silent made me complicit in enabling future victims. I made copies of everything and organized the evidence into separate files, one for my divorce attorney, one for the school board, one for the district superintendent, and one for the media if institutional pressure wasn't enough. Michelle had chosen to protect a predator over her own family. She'd silenced other mothers' warnings, used our resources to enable his behavior, and exposed our son to inappropriate conduct. The betrayal went far beyond adultery. It was a systematic compromise of everything I'd thought she valued. The coach's playbook was about to be exposed, and Michelle's name was written all over it. Margaret Chen's law office occupied the top floor of a downtown building with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a commanding view of the city. She was younger than I'd expected, with the sharp efficiency of someone who'd built her practice on high-conflict divorces. "You've done exceptional work," she said after reviewing my evidence files. "Most clients come to me with suspicions and credit card statements. You've brought me a federal case." The morality clause in Michelle's teaching contract was even more comprehensive than I'd hoped. Any conduct that reflected poorly on the district, violated professional standards, or compromised the educational environment could result in immediate termination. Using school resources for personal affairs, including team events and district facilities, was specifically prohibited. "She's violated her contract in at least 6 different ways," Margaret explained, highlighting relevant sections. The affair itself, the use of school resources, the failure to report inappropriate conduct by a colleague, and the active cover-up of misconduct allegations. The legal architecture of my revenge was more sophisticated than I'd imagined. Michelle's employment contract created multiple vulnerabilities that could be exploited sequentially for maximum impact. The divorce would be just the beginning. Her career, her reputation, and her financial security were all at risk. "We can coordinate with the school board investigation," Margaret continued. "Time your evidence release to coincide with their hearing. That way, she loses her job and her marriage simultaneously. The strategy was elegant in its simplicity. Present the evidence to the school board first, triggering Michelle's termination for contract violation. Then, file for divorce, using her job loss and moral turpitude as grounds for favorable custody and asset division. Finally, support the criminal investigation into financial fraud. Michelle's use of district resources for personal affairs could result in felony charges. "What about Coach Ramirez?" I asked. "He's already under investigation. Your evidence will end his career and likely result in criminal charges. The district is going to want to settle quickly to avoid liability for enabling his behavior." Margaret explained the timeline for maximum impact. The school board hearing was scheduled for the following month. If we presented evidence 2 weeks before the hearing, Michelle would have no time to mount a defense or negotiate a resignation. The public nature of the termination would make her unemployable in education, her chosen career. "He'll lose her teaching license," Margaret said. "That's not just a job. That's her entire professional identity." The financial implications were equally devastating. Michelle's salary represented 60% of our household income. Her teacher's retirement account, built over 15 years of public service, would be vulnerable in the divorce proceedings. The potential criminal charges could result in restitution payments and legal fees that would consume any remaining assets. "What about custody?" I asked. "Her conduct demonstrates poor judgment and moral fitness. The affair itself isn't disqualifying, but the pattern of deception, the compromising of your son's educational environment, and the enabling of predatory behavior create a compelling case for primary custody." I signed the retainer agreement and authorized Margaret to begin formal proceedings. The legal machinery was now in motion, and Michelle had no idea what was coming. That evening, I sat in my office reviewing the evidence files one final time. Screenshots of her text messages, surveillance photos, financial records, and employment documents. A comprehensive case that would destroy her career, her marriage, and her reputation. The woman who'd shared my bed for 12 years had systematically betrayed our family and enabled a predator. She'd assumed I was too weak, too trusting, too focused on my own work to notice her deception. She'd underestimated the man she'd married and the father she'd chosen to betray. Tomorrow, I would begin the process of delivering justice. Not just for myself, but for every family that had been victimized by the system Michelle had helped protect. The morality clause she'd signed would become the instrument of her destruction. She'd made her choices. Now she would face the consequences. The school board meeting was scheduled for 7 p.m. on a Tuesday, but I began my campaign at 8 a.m. that morning. First call, District Superintendent Dr. Patricia Walsh. I'd met her at several school events over the years, a capable administrator who'd built her reputation on maintaining district standards. Her assistant tried to schedule a meeting for the following week, but I made it clear that the information I possessed required immediate attention. "I have evidence of ongoing misconduct by Coach Ramirez and active cover-up by one of your teachers," I told her directly. "Evidence that could expose the district to significant liability if not addressed immediately." Dr. Walsh agreed to see me at noon. Second call, Board President Jennifer Morrison. Mother of 3, former teacher herself, someone who'd built her political career on protecting children and maintaining educational standards. I requested a private meeting before the evening's public session. Third call, Carmen Rodriguez. "Execute the media strategy," I told her. "Full documentation to the Tribune, the Herald, and Channel 7. Embargo until tomorrow morning, but make sure they understand the scope of the story." By 10 a.m., I was sitting in Dr. Walsh's office, sliding a comprehensive evidence packet across her desk. Her expression changed as she reviewed the surveillance photos, text messages, and financial records. "How long have you known about this?" she asked. "I've been investigating for 6 weeks. The affair has been ongoing for at least 4 months." She continued reading, her face growing more serious with each page. "Mrs. Williams used district resources to facilitate this relationship?" Teen events, school facilities, and district credit cards, all documented in the financial records. Dr. Walsh set down the file and looked at me directly. "What do you want?" "Justice. For my family, for the other families who've been victimized, and for the students who deserve better than this." She nodded slowly. The board will need to review this evidence. Both employees will be suspended, pending investigation. Coach Ramirez is already under investigation for the Peterson complaint. This evidence establishes a pattern of predatory behavior that the district failed to address. Dr. Walsh's expression hardened. She understood the liability implications immediately. We'll need to contact our legal counsel. At 2 p.m., I met with Board President Morrison at her insurance office. She'd already spoken with Dr. Walsh and reviewed the evidence summary. This is devastating, she said, not just for the individuals involved, but for the district's reputation. The district enabled this behavior, I replied. Coach Ramirez has been transferred between schools to avoid dealing with complaints. That's a policy decision, not an oversight. Morrison nodded grimly. The board takes these allegations seriously. We'll be voting on employment termination tonight. The 7 p.m. board meeting was standing room only, packed with parents who'd heard rumors about the emergency session. Michelle sat in the front row, still unaware of the storm that was about to break. Coach Ramirez was noticeably absent. His attorney had advised him not to attend. Board President Morrison called the meeting to order and immediately moved to executive session. The public was excluded while the board reviewed evidence and testimony. I was called in as a witness, presenting my findings to the 5-member board with the clinical precision of an insurance investigator. The questions were direct and professional. Had I witnessed inappropriate conduct? Yes. Did I have evidence of policy violations? Yes. Had I attempted to resolve the matter through normal channels? No. The evidence showed the district had previously failed to address similar complaints. After 90 minutes of testimony, the board returned to public session. Morrison's announcement was brief and devastating. The board has voted to terminate the employment of Coach Roberto Ramirez and suspend Mrs. Michelle Williams pending further investigation. Both employees violated district policy regarding professional conduct and appropriate use of district resources. The room erupted. Parents shouted questions, demanded explanations, and argued about the evidence. Michelle sat frozen, her face completely white, finally understanding the scope of her exposure. I watched from the back of the room as her world collapsed in real time. Her teaching colleagues avoided eye contact. Other parents whispered and stared. The carefully constructed image of the devoted teacher and supportive football mom crumbled in front of the entire community. The local news crews were waiting in the parking lot, alerted by Carmen's strategic leaks. Michelle walked past them without comment, but the footage would lead tomorrow's evening news. Local teacher suspended in misconduct investigation. By 10 p.m., the story was trending on social media. The district's Facebook page was flooded with comments from parents demanding answers. The high school football team's season was in jeopardy, with their coach terminated mid-season. I drove home alone, listening to talk radio discuss the scandal. The hosts were speculating about the evidence, the district's liability, and the impact on the athletic program. My private betrayal had become public spectacle. Michelle's car wasn't in the driveway when I arrived. She was probably at her sister's house or maybe a hotel, trying to process the complete destruction of her professional life. Tomorrow, she would face the additional consequences: divorce papers, custody challenges, and potential criminal charges. I sat in my living room, surrounded by the evidence of our shared life, and felt the complex satisfaction of justice delivered. The woman who'd betrayed our family had faced the consequences of her choices. The predator who'd exploited his position had been removed from power. The system that had enabled their behavior had been exposed. But victory felt different than I'd expected. The house was quiet, too quiet, and I found myself wondering if destroying Michelle's life had been worth the cost of destroying our family's normalcy. Outside, the suburban street looked the same as always, but inside our home, everything had changed forever. 6 months later, I was reading the morning paper when Jake asked if he could call his mother. "She's picking you up at noon," I reminded him, not looking up from the sports section. Michelle had supervised visitation now, every other weekend, Wednesday dinners, and alternating holidays. The custody arrangement had been finalized 3 months ago, along with the divorce decree that left her with minimal assets and no claim to the house. "I know," Jake said, pouring cereal into his bowl. "I just wanted to tell her about the scholarship application." My son had adapted to our new reality better than I'd expected. The scandal had followed him to his new school, but he'd made friends and earned a spot on the freshman football team. His grades had actually improved since the divorce. Less chaos at home, more structured routines, and the absence of his mother's constant stress. Michelle was teaching at St. Catherine's now, a private school that paid half her previous salary and offered no benefits. Her rental room was in a converted basement across town, furnished with whatever she'd managed to salvage from her marriage. Coach Ramirez had faced more severe consequences. The criminal investigation had resulted in fraud charges for his use of district resources, and the civil lawsuit from the Peterson family had been settled for an undisclosed amount. He worked at Home Depot now, coaching youth leagues under court supervision. His wife had divorced him and moved to Colorado with their children. I'd received updates on the broader fallout through Carmen's network. 3 other families had come forward with complaints against Ramirez, and the district had settled all civil claims for a total of $2,300,000, 0 cents. 2 board members had resigned, and Dr. Walsh had taken early retirement. The football program had been placed under external oversight. My own life had found a different rhythm. The house felt larger without Michelle's presence, but also cleaner, more organized. I'd hired a cleaning service and learned to cook more than the basic meals that had sustained me during the investigation. The mortgage payments were manageable on my single income, and I'd opened a college fund for Jake with Michelle's share of our retirement accounts. Dating had been tentative at first. Who wants to be involved with a man whose revenge had made local news? But I'd met Sarah at a client conference, and she'd been intrigued rather than intimidated by my story. A divorce attorney herself, she understood the complexity of marital betrayal and the satisfaction of well-executed justice. "You protected your son," she'd said during our 3rd dinner together. "That's what good fathers do." The community had largely moved on from the scandal. New controversies had replaced our drama in the local news cycle. The high school had hired a new coach, and the football team was having a successful season. Most parents had forgotten the details of Michelle's affair and focused on their own family's immediate concerns. But I hadn't forgotten. I kept copies of all the evidence in my office safe, along with the legal documents that had formalized Michelle's destruction. Not out of continued anger, but as a reminder of what happens when trust is systematically violated. Jake's scholarship application was for academic achievement, not athletics. He'd decided he wanted to study engineering, possibly insurance actuarial science. "I want to investigate things like you did," he'd told me. "Figure out the truth when people are lying." The irony wasn't lost on me. My son had learned more about investigation techniques during his parents' divorce than most adults learn in a lifetime. He'd watched me methodically gather evidence, present a case, and execute a plan that destroyed his mother's life. The lessons about consequences and justice had been visceral and permanent. At noon, Michelle arrived to pick up Jake for their weekend visit. She looked older, thinner, and defeated in a way that money couldn't fix. The confident teacher who'd managed classrooms and charmed parents had been replaced by someone who apologized for existing. "How was your week?" she asked Jake, avoiding eye contact with me. "Good. I got accepted to the honors program." "That's wonderful." She hugged him with desperate intensity. "I'm so proud of you." I watched them drive away in her used Honda. The reliable car had been one of her few assets that survived the divorce. She'd take him to lunch at McDonald's, then to a movie she couldn't really afford. They'd spend 2 days trying to recreate normalcy in her tiny apartment, pretending that everything was going to be okay. The truth was more complicated. Michelle would never recover from the professional destruction, never regain the respect she'd lost, never rebuild the life she'd systematically destroyed. But she was still Jake's mother, still the woman who'd raised him for 12 years before everything went wrong. I'd achieved everything I'd wanted. Comprehensive justice, primary custody, financial security, and the satisfaction of consequences delivered. The woman who'd betrayed our family had lost everything that mattered to her. The predator who'd exploited his position had been removed from power. The system that had enabled their behavior had been reformed. But sitting in my quiet house, I wondered if victory had been worth the cost. I'd protected my son and punished my wife's betrayal, but I'd also taught him that love could become hatred, that marriage could become warfare, and that the people you trust most were capable of the deepest betrayal. The suburban street looked the same as always, The mortgage was paid, the lawn was maintained, and the family photos still lined the hallway. But the perfect life I'd once ensured was gone forever, replaced by something harder and more honest. I'd learned that revenge was a form of justice, but justice wasn't the same as healing. The wounds Michelle had inflicted would never fully disappear, no matter how complete her punishment had been. The new normal was better than the old lies, but it was still a life rebuilt from the ashes of betrayal. And some things, once burned, could never be made perfect again. And so, we've reached the end of today's story. Was it what you expected, or did it take a twist you didn't see coming? I'm curious to hear your thoughts. Share them in the comments below, and let's get a conversation going. If this story kept you hooked, make sure to hit that like button. And if you're new here or just haven't subscribed yet, now's the perfect time to join our community. I bring you fresh, captivating stories every day, so click that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss out. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.